Leia Quinn was a mere 10 years old when her loyal rescued German Shepherd, Ranger, led her into the snow-choked alleys of Ashford. What began as a frightened child's desperate search for a warm haven morphed into a night that would irrevocably alter countless destinies. Ranger's frantic barking, a symphony of canine urgency, guided her unerringly to two unconscious figures, federal agents felled by an insidious poison, clinging precariously to life, and guardians of a long-buried government secret. Their discovery ignited a chain reaction of bravery and absolution, blurring the fragile boundary between justice, self-sacrifice, and the unwavering bond that offers salvation when all other forces fail. Before we delve into this extraordinary tale, I'm curious to know where you're joining us from, and if you appreciate narratives of faith, resilience, and the miracles that subtly accompany us on our daily journeys, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. The snow fell once more over Ashford, Oregon, a quaint town enveloped in the hushed stillness of collective weariness. Streetlights struggled to pierce the dense fog, their weak, trembling halos casting an ethereal glow on the icy pavement. Each gust of wind carried the sharp, clean scent of pine, mingling with the distant, mournful echo of a train traversing the valley. Down on Ashford Street, nestled between shops with their shutters drawn tight and windows barricaded against the elements, 8-year-old Leia Quinn trudged through the slushy mire. Her coat, several sizes too large, hung from her small shoulders like a forgotten relic, its faded brown wool whispering stories of a past that no longer fit. Tangled honey-brown hair peeked from beneath a frayed knitted cap, and her cheeks were streaked with a mixture of grime and the lingering trails of frozen tears. In one hand, she clutched a torn plastic bag containing meager provisions, crumbs and a discarded half-loaf of bread salvaged from behind a local bakery. Beside her walked Ranger, a 6-year-old German Shepherd, his ribs faintly visible beneath his coarse black and tan fur. His gait was uneven, hampered by an old injury that stiffened his hind leg. Yet, his amber eyes, sharp and alert, never wavered from the girl's side. Each step was measured, deliberate, as if he were safeguarding a precious, fragile treasure. They paused behind Parker's diner, where the overflowing dumpsters offered a faint glimmer of hope for a makeshift dinner. Leia pried open the heavy lid, wincing at the pungent, sour odor, and discovered a half-eaten sandwich, still partially encased in wax paper. She carefully tore it in two, offering the larger portion to Ranger. "Here," she whispered, her voice trembling in the frigid air. "You need it more than I do." Ranger sniffed the offering, but nudged it back toward her with his nose. His tail gave a single, slow and weary wag. "You're stubborn?" Leia said softly, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. "Just like Dad used to say about you." The mention of her father's name hung heavy in the air, like a forbidden prayer. She hadn't spoken of him in months, not since the devastating night the fire consumed their trailer, taking everything with it. Ranger had been her sole witness to the harrowing aftermath, the impersonal shelters, the endless stretches of road, and her mother's gradual descent into a world of drugs and empty promises. Now, only Ranger remained, a steadfast anchor in her turbulent existence. Leia crouched beside him, pulling the hood of her oversized coat tighter as the wind intensified. The street beyond the alley was deserted, save for the faint hum of a flickering neon sign across the way. Ashford Pawn and Loan. Suddenly, Ranger froze. His ears shot up, every muscle tensed and ready. A low growl rumbled in his throat, a warning tremor. "What is it, boy?" Leia whispered, her gaze following his. From the narrow opening of an alleyway across the street came a strange noise, a sharp, metallic clatter followed by a muffled groan. Ranger's growl deepened, escalating into a guttural threat, and before Leia could grasp his collar, he bolted toward the sound, his nails scraping against the icy pavement. "Ranger, wait!" she cried, her feet slipping as she gave chase. The alley swallowed them both, plunging them into an oppressive darkness, amplified by the absence of light. Only a sliver of moonlight managed to penetrate, glinting off the frozen puddles. The air was thick with a sharp, chemical stench that stung her nostrils. Ranger halted near a stack of dilapidated crates, barking with unrestrained fury. Leia stumbled forward and froze, her breath catching in her throat. Two figures lay crumpled against the cold brick wall, a man and a woman, both clad in dark suits. Their wrists were bound together with thick electrical wire. Their faces were an unnatural, pale blue in the faint moonlight, and a thin trail of white froth bubbled from their mouths. The woman's head rested limply on the man's shoulder, her cascade of dark chestnut hair tangled and wet. The man's tie was torn, his hand twitching spasmodically against the concrete. Leia gasped, a wave of fear washing over her. "Oh no, oh no." Ranger whined softly and nudged the woman's arm with his nose, sniffing her face, searching for a sign of life. The faintest wisp of breath clouded near her lips, alive, but barely. Without a moment's hesitation, Leia turned and screamed into the night, her voice cracking with fear and desperation. "Help! Somebody, please!" Her cry shattered the silence like shattering glass, the sound echoing off the brick walls. Ranger barked alongside her, his cries adding to the symphony of distress. On the other end of Ashford Street, Sergeant Ben Hollister, a veteran patrolman with the Ashford Police Department, tightened his scarf and rubbed his gloved hands together. The 40-year-old officer had served the town for nearly 15 years, though the last 5 had taken a visible toll, etching deep lines of sorrow around his gray eyes. He still wore his wedding ring, a constant reminder of the wife who had left him after their daughter's tragic death. Tonight, the wind seemed to whisper Abby's name, intensifying the ache in his heart. The crackle of the radio on his shoulder barely registered. It was the distinct sound of a dog's barking that truly grabbed his attention. A deep, desperate sound, echoing from the alleys behind Parker's diner. He spun around sharply. "That's close," he muttered, grabbing his flashlight and heading towards the sound. By the time he reached the alley, the beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness and landed on the small figure of a girl kneeling beside 2 motionless bodies. "Hey!" he shouted, running forward. "Step back. It's okay. I'm with the police." Leia's face jerked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. For a moment, she appeared ready to flee, but Ranger stepped protectively between them, his growl low and warning. Ben stopped, lowering his voice, trying to project an aura of calm. Easy, boy. I'm here to help. Ranger's growl faltered. Hesitant. Leia hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. They're not breathing right. Please help them. Ben knelt, his flashlight trembling slightly as he examined the two victims. The man's pulse was faint but steady. The woman's breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps. He immediately reached for his radio. This is Sergeant Hollister requesting immediate medical response to Ashford and 5th. 2 victims. Possible poisoning. Repeat. Possible poisoning. Send backup and hazmat. Then, turning his attention back to Leia, he spoke with reassuring firmness. You did good, kid. Real good. Leia didn't answer. She remained frozen, shivering, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Ranger pressed closer, his eyes darting nervously between the victims and the street. Ben removed his heavy coat and draped it around the girl's shoulders. What's your name? Leia, she murmured. Leia Quinn, he nodded, memorizing the name. And your friend? She looked down at Ranger and managed a faint, weary smile. Ranger. Ben gave a small chuckle, though his heart ached for the girl's plight. Ranger, huh? Good name. Sirens wailed in the distance, slicing through the hushed snowfall. Red and blue lights splashed across the wet bricks as the ambulance screeched to a halt, followed closely by a police SUV. Paramedics rushed into the alley, kneeling beside the 2 victims. One of them, a young woman with sharp, assessing eyes, lifted her head and called out. They're alive but barely. We need to move now. Ben exhaled in relief, the tension easing slightly from his shoulders. He looked down at Leia, who was staring intently at the woman being loaded onto the stretcher, her small hands trembling. She's going to be okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yeah, Ben said softly, his voice laced with genuine admiration. You saved her life. The words hit Leia harder than he expected. Her lower lip quivered, betraying the depth of her emotions. She turned away quickly, blinking back a fresh wave of tears. Ranger brushed against her leg, as if sensing her sudden flood of memories, the fire, the helplessness, the crushing feeling of arriving too late. Ben opened the back door of his cruiser. Come on, let's get you warm. He guided Leia inside, wrapping her in a thick fleece blanket from the back seat. Ranger jumped in after her, curling protectively at her feet. The heater hummed, fogging the windows with warmth. From the corner of his eye, Ben studied her, small, silent, yet possessing a quiet strength that belied her age. There was something about the way she carried herself, chin tucked, but eyes always alert, that reminded him painfully of his own daughter, Abby, whose laughter had once filled the same car, before the fire stole her away. For a long moment, neither spoke, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic swoosh of the windshield wipers. Then, Leia looked up, her eyes filled with unspoken questions. Are they going to die? Ben shook his head, offering a reassuring smile. Not if we can help it. Outside, the medics were carefully loading the 2 victims into separate ambulances. A second police unit arrived, led by Captain Evelyn Moore, a tall, imposing woman in her 50s with silver hair pinned tightly beneath her cap. Her presence radiated authority without effort. Even Ben straightened slightly when she approached. Status? She asked briskly, her voice all business. 2 victims, both alive. Girl here found them. Possible neurotoxin. Same as last month's lab case. Evelyn's eyes sharpened, her expression hardening. FBI agents? Ben frowned, surprised by her quick assessment. How did you know? She gestured towards the torn jackets, now being sealed in evidence bags. They're a bureau issue. The man's ID identifies him as Noah Grant. The woman is Elise Monroe, both missing from the Portland field office since yesterday. The realization settled over them like a cold weight. Whoever did this, Evelyn muttered, her voice grim, knew exactly what they were doing. Ben's gaze drifted back to Leia in the cruiser, her small figure silhouetted against the fogged window. And that kid just stumbled right into it. Evelyn followed his gaze, her expression softening for a fleeting moment. Then she's lucky to be alive. Across the street, shrouded in the shadows of an old warehouse, a man in a weathered leather jacket observed the unfolding scene. His features were obscured by the brim of a wool cap. But when the flashing lights momentarily illuminated his face, a faint scar, curving along his neck, became visible, a pale white mark against the stubble. His eyes were icy gray, and he studied the girl in the police car with an unnerving intensity. He took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaled slowly, and whispered, almost tenderly, "Still loyal, aren't you, Ranger?" Then, he turned and melted into the darkness, leaving no trace. The lights of St. Mary's Medical Center burned brightly through the fog like a small constellation on the edge of Ashford. Inside, the hallways smelled of antiseptic and fear, that sharp, sterile scent that clung to every breath. Sergeant Ben Hollister stood just outside the emergency ward, his winter jacket still dusted with snow. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, exhaustion weighing heavily on his eyes. It had only been an hour since the incident in the alley, yet the image of the 2 motionless agents continued to haunt him. He replayed the scene in his mind, the girl's trembling voice, the foam at the victims' mouths, the faint pulse that stubbornly refused to quit. A nurse called his name, breaking his reverie. "Sergeant, they're stabilizing the male now. The female's condition is critical but holding." Ben nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his weary face. Thank God. Through the small glass window, he could see the 2 agents under the harsh fluorescent lights. Electrodes lined their chests. Monitors beeped in erratic rhythms. A team of doctors moved quickly, a blur of white coats and focused urgency. The senior doctor among them, Dr. Mason Ellis, barked orders with the precision of a seasoned field commander. He was in his mid-50s, tall and lean, his once dark hair now streaked with silver at the temples. Deep lines were etched into his face, the unmistakable marks of a man who had witnessed too many close calls. "Get a tox screen on both. Full panel," Ellis instructed. "Their pupils are constricted, breathing shallow. This looks like a neurotoxin." A younger doctor frowned, concern etched on his face. "Which one?" Ellis's tone turned grim. "Something military grade. Call the bureau liaison in Portland. We might have just stumbled into something federal." In another wing of the hospital, Leia Quinn sat in an oversized chair outside the pediatric ward. A soft blanket enveloped her small frame, her boots barely touching the floor. The world around her buzzed with activity, footsteps, intercom announcements, and hushed voices that seemed distant and muffled. She stared at her hands, small, scraped, and trembling. Her fingers carried the lingering scent of the alley, of metal and cold. Across the hall, Ranger lay on a folded towel, a faint bandage wrapped around his hind leg. He lifted his head whenever someone passed by, but his eyes always returned to Leia, offering silent reassurance. A woman approached, tall, warm-eyed, with chestnut hair pulled into a loose bun. She wore a teal veterinary coat under her jacket, a stethoscope slung casually around her neck. "Hey there," she said softly, her voice gentle and calming. "You must be Leia. I'm Dr. Emily Hart. I take care of animals, not people, but the officer said Ranger could use a little help." Leia's voice was small, barely audible. "He's okay, right?" Emily knelt, running her hand gently over the dog's side. "He's tougher than he looks. The cuts are shallow, but he's malnourished. I'll clean him up, give him fluids." Ranger watched her carefully, as if assessing her intentions. Emily smiled, her voice soothing. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" As she brushed back the fur on his left ear, her expression changed, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. There, faintly engraved in the skin, was a small tattoo of letters and numbers. K973A. She sat back, blinking, processing the information. "Well, I'll be. This isn't just any dog." Leia frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Emily looked up at her, her tone serious. "This marking, it means Ranger used to be part of a federal K9 unit. These are permanent IDs used by law enforcement. Someone must have trained him and then let him go." Leia's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding dawning in her eyes. "You mean he used to be like a police dog?" "Exactly." Emily's tone softened, a hint of admiration in her voice, and a good one judging by how he found those agents tonight. Ben appeared in the doorway, his uniform damp with melted snow. "Doc, you find something?" Emily hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "More than I expected. He's got a federal tag. Could be connected to whoever attacked those agents." Ben's brow furrowed, his mind racing. "You're saying the dog might know the suspect? Or the suspect might know him?" Emily replied quietly, her voice laced with caution. Hours later, in the ICU, Agent Noah Grant slowly opened his eyes to a blur of white light and the constant drone of mechanical noises. His throat burned with an agonizing fire, and every muscle in his body screamed in protest. A soft hiss of oxygen filled the air, a constant reminder of his precarious state. "Take it slow," came a calm, reassuring voice. Dr. Ellis leaned over him, carefully adjusting the four-drip. "You've been poisoned, Agent Grant. You're lucky to be alive." Noah tried to speak, but his lips barely moved, his voice a mere rasp. "Where's Elise?" "She's stable," Ellis said, offering a small measure of comfort. "Still unconscious, but she's fighting." Noah exhaled shakily, the fight returning to his eyes. His memories were fragmented, a jumbled mess of images and sensations. Flashes of a parking lot, the acrid scent of fuel, a shadow moving with unnatural speed. Then, a voice, deep and familiar, echoing in his mind, saying, "I told you, truth always finds its way through the rot." He closed his eyes, the pieces beginning to fall into place. Thomas Riek. When Dr. Ellis had left, Noah stared at the ceiling, his jaw tightening with renewed determination. Riek had once been his mentor, the man who had taught him field protocol, interrogation techniques, and the blurry line that separated justice from vengeance. The Bureau had dismissed Riek for corruption, but Noah had always suspected something far more sinister. Now, it seemed the past had clawed its way back, seeking to settle an old score. By morning, the snowfall outside had intensified, blanketing the town in a thick layer of white. The small town hospital buzzed with the arrival of new faces, agents from the Portland FBI field office. Leading them was Special Agent Maria Delgado, a woman in her late 30s with sharp, well-defined cheekbones, olive skin, and a voice honed by years of command. She entered Noah's room with brisk efficiency. "Agent Grant, I'm Maria Delgado, Internal Security. We'll need your statement as soon as you're ready." Noah's voice was hoarse, but steady. "We were ambushed outside the lab site on Jefferson Road. Elise and I were tracing shipments of a compound called Prototype X9. We thought it was decommissioned years ago." Delgado exchanged a quick, knowing glance with her partner. "X9 is on the banned list from the Sentinel Project." "Correct," Noah said, his voice laced with grim determination. "And only one man knew the shipment routes, Thomas Riek. He was there. I saw him before everything went dark." Delgado's pen stopped moving, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Riek, as in your former superior?" "The same one." Noah met her gaze, his eyes cold and unwavering. "The same." Delgado straightened, her expression hardening. "That's a serious accusation, Agent Grant." "It's not an accusation," Noah replied coldly. "It's a memory." Meanwhile, in a small conference room down the hall, Ben sat across from Leia. The fluorescent light flickered above them, casting pale shadows across their faces. A social worker hovered nearby, diligently taking notes. "Just tell me what you remember, sweetheart," Ben said gently, his voice reassuring. "Anything you saw or heard before we arrived." Leia hesitated, twisting the edge of her blanket in her small hands. "There was a smell before we found them." "What kind of smell?" Ben asked, leaning forward slightly. She squinted, searching for the right words to describe the lingering scent. "Like gasoline and metal. Like something old and rusty." Ben's interest peaked, his heart rate quickening slightly. "Rusty, you say?" She nodded, her eyes fixed on the blanket in her lap. "And I saw someone at the end of the alley. He wore a jacket dark brown, I think. When he turned, I saw something shine on his neck. Maybe a scar." Ben's heartbeat quickened, a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. A scar on his neck. That matched an old description in the Bureau's file on Riek. The social worker whispered, her voice barely audible. "You think she saw him?" Ben didn't answer, his mind already piecing together the fragments of information. He glanced at the small German shepherd curled beside the girl's chair. Ranger lifted his head. His ears perked, as if he understood the gravity of their words. Later that afternoon, Emily found Ben leaning against the railing near the parking lot. The snow had ceased falling, now swirling gently in soft flakes that glittered under the hospital lights. I ran the tag number, she said, approaching him. Ranger's ID traces back to a federal database. He was registered to a K9 unit under the Sentinel Project, the same one connected to this X9 toxin. Ben's breath fogged in the cold air. You're telling me this dog and Riek came from the same operation? Emily nodded solemnly, confirming his suspicions. If Riek was in charge back then, he might have trained Ranger himself. Ben exhaled slowly, shaking his head in disbelief. So, this kid's best friend might have belonged to the man who nearly killed 2 federal agents. Emily looked towards the hospital window, where Leia sat visible through the glass, gently stroking Ranger's fur. Funny thing about dogs, she murmured, her voice barely audible. They remember loyalty better than most people. But they also know when it's been broken. Ben followed her gaze, his heart aching for the young girl. Inside, Ranger pressed closer to Leia's hand, his ears flicking at the sound of distant footsteps. For the first time since that night, the dog's eyes no longer looked haunted. They looked watchful, alert, as though he too remembered something. That evening, the hospital quieted to a low hum, the frantic activity of the day giving way to a sense of weary calm. Noah lay awake in his bed, staring at the faint shadow of the 4 line on his arm. From the adjoining room came the rhythmic beep of Elise Monroe's heart monitor, steady, alive. He closed his eyes and whispered into the darkness, his voice filled with unwavering resolve. I'll find him, Elise, I swear I will. Outside, snow whispered against the windows, a hushed lullaby carried on the wind. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, under the same pale moon, Thomas Riek stood at the edge of a forest road, watching the lights in the distance. He dropped a cigarette into the snow and murmured, his voice laced with a mixture of bitterness and satisfaction. Still following my trail, aren't you, Grant? Then he turned and disappeared into the woods, leaving behind only the faint smell of gasoline and rust. The snow outside St. Mary's Hospital had melted into gray slush, leaving behind the lingering scent of salt and diesel. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting a weary glow on the white walls. Inside room 214, Leia Quinn sat cross-legged on the bed, a small figure lost among the crisp sheets. She was eating oatmeal from a plastic bowl, though her eyes kept darting towards the door, as if she feared someone might tell her to leave, disrupting the temporary sanctuary she had found. Ranger lay curled on a folded blanket at the foot of the bed, his ears twitching with every distant sound. His fur was cleaner now, brushed to reveal the sleek lines of a once proud working dog. Yet, beneath the hospital's facade of calm, there lingered a quiet tension, the kind that followed people who had spent too long expecting something bad to happen. When the door opened, Sergeant Ben Hollister stepped in, holding a paper cup of cocoa. His coat hung loosely over his shoulders, his badge catching the soft light. He looked older in the morning, dark circles under his eyes, the faint tremor of someone running on too little sleep. Brought you this, he said, setting the cup beside her. It's not fancy, but it's warm. Leia nodded, her eyes fixed on the steaming cup. Thank you, sir. He smiled gently, trying to ease the tension in the room. You can call me Ben. Sir, makes me sound like I should be handing out parking tickets. That earned a small giggle, fleeting, but genuine. Ranger lifted his head, sensing her brief moment of ease, then rested it again on his paws. Ben hesitated, glancing at the worn, stuffed bear someone from pediatrics had left on her pillow. The bureau's arranging things, he said carefully, choosing his words with deliberation. They'll need to talk to you again about what you saw that night, but you're not in trouble, Leia. You helped save 2 lives. The girl's expression flickered, a mixture of pride and uncertainty warring within her. People don't usually say I help. They usually tell me to go away. Ben's chest tightened, his heart aching for the burdens this young girl carried. You've had a hard run, huh? Leia shrugged, her eyes fixed on the blanket in her lap. My dad was a firefighter. He died when I was 6. He went into a house to save a baby, but the roof fell. Her voice was flat, practiced, the tone of someone who had told the story too many times, just to make it hurt less. After that, Mom said she couldn't breathe without him. She started using stuff. Then one night she just didn't come back. Ben sat in silence, absorbing her words, the quiet between them filled with the hum of hospital machines. Finally, he said softly, his voice filled with genuine empathy. And Ranger? Leia reached down to stroke the dog's head, her touch gentle and comforting. He found me behind a diner. People threw rocks at him because he stole food. I shared what I had. Since then, he doesn't leave. Ben nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He remembered a similar stray, a golden retriever his daughter Abby had begged to keep after they found it near the fire station. That memory stabbed at him like cold metal, so he cleared his throat and forced a smile. You two make a good team. Leia smiled faintly, a hint of warmth in her eyes. Yeah, we don't have anyone else. Down the hall, Agent Noah Grant leaned against the window, watching the snow melt into muddy water. His right arm was still bandaged, his veins slowly clearing the residue of the X9 toxin from his system. The morning light sharpened the planes of his face, square jaw, short cropped hair, the faint shadow of stubble that never seemed to leave. He looked tired, but not just from the toxin. It was the kind of fatigue that came from old ghosts, the kind that didn't heal with sleep. Footsteps approached, breaking his reverie. Agent Elise Monroe, pale but standing, appeared in the doorway, wearing a hospital gown under her jacket. Her hazel eyes still carried traces of pain, but the spark of determination was unmistakable. You should be in bed, Noah said, without turning from the window. So should you, she replied, her voice laced with dry humor. Her smile was thin, but teasing. They told me the girl's awake. Yeah, Noah said, finally turning to face her. The doctor says she's tough. 8 years old and already saving federal agents. Elise chuckled softly, the sound weak but genuine. Guess we owe her a thank you. Noah finally looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. You sure you're up for that? I almost died, Grant, she said, her voice steady and unwavering. The least I can do is say thank you to the kid who stopped it. When they entered Leia's room, the child froze for a heartbeat, her spoon suspended mid-air. Ranger rose instantly, his posture alert, but his tail wagged once when he recognized Elise's scent. Faint traces of antiseptic in the alley from that night. Elise crouched beside the bed, her movements slow and deliberate. Up close, she looked both fierce and fragile, the sharp lines of her cheekbones softened by the exhaustion beneath her eyes. "Hey, Leia," she said gently, her voice warm and reassuring. "You probably don't remember me too well, but you saved my life." Leia blinked, unsure how to respond. "You were the lady in the alley." "That's right." Elise smiled, holding out her hand. "Thank you for calling for help, and thank you for having the courage to look." Leia stared at the outstretched hand for a long second before hesitantly taking it, her small fingers swallowed by Elise's. Her small fingers were icy, yet her grip was surprisingly strong. I just didn't want you to die," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Noah stood silently in the corner, arms crossed tightly over his chest. Something about the tableau, Elise's unwavering calm juxtaposed against Leia's trembling courage, struck a chord within him, a resonant frequency that stirred long-buried memories. It was like a ghostly echo of his younger sister, Hannah, barely 13, standing drenched in a relentless rainstorm, calling out his name with desperate urgency moments before the screech of tires and the sickening crunch of metal silenced her forever. He had been too late that night, paralyzed by indecision, too slow to save her. Watching Leia now, the same gut-wrenching feeling of helplessness clawed at his insides. He took a step closer, his voice unusually gentle. "You did more than most adults would have, Leia. You saved 2 agents, maybe even more. Never forget that." Leia's gaze drifted towards his wrist, lingering on the telltale signs of his recent ordeal, the faded hospital tag, the lingering pinprick marks from the 4-line. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. Noah hesitated, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "It used to," he admitted. "Not so much now." Ranger, sensing the shift in atmosphere, nudged Elise's arm with his nose, a silent offering of comfort. Elise smiled, stroking his thick fur. "You know," she said, glancing at Noah with a knowing look. "For a retired K-9, this guy still has better instincts than most of the active agents I've worked with." "Retired?" Leia asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Your vet friend found his ID tattoo," Elise explained. "He used to belong to the Bureau's Sentinel Division. That's a special unit that worked on dangerous stuff. Looks like he walked away from it. Can't blame him." Leia frowned thoughtfully. "So, he was a soldier too?" Elise nodded, her expression tinged with a hint of melancholy. "A very good one." Noah caught the subtle shift in her tone, the undercurrent of both admiration and a hint of dread. He knew exactly what she was thinking. The Sentinel Project, with all its morally ambiguous methods, was Thomas Rieck's brainchild. And if Ranger had been a part of it, their pasts were intertwined in ways he hadn't even begun to comprehend. Later that day, Ben met with Special Agent Maria Delgado in a cramped debriefing room on the first floor. She stood by the window blinds, the slatted shadows striping her face, reading intently from a tablet. Her expression was grim, her mouth a tight line. "You were right," she said finally. "Rieck wasn't just our superior. He was the project's field commander. He oversaw the initial development of X9 under a black budget, all off the books. After the scandal, the civilian casualties, the whole project was buried. Officially, it doesn't exist." Ben crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "And unofficially?" "Unofficially," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Someone's been trying to resurrect it. 2 months ago, we had a data breach at the Bureau's archive. Someone copied the formula files. Rieck had clearance even after he was terminated." Ben frowned, a knot forming in his stomach. "Why bring it to Ashford?" Delgado handed him a manila folder, its edges worn. Inside was a grainy photograph of a burned-out warehouse, its roof half collapsed, a skeletal silhouette against the gray sky. "Because this is where the original compound was tested. Rieck's wife died here during the trial run. She was one of the exposure victims. The Bureau covered it up, swept it under the rug." Ben's jaw tightened, the muscle in his cheek twitching. "So this is personal. More than just some disgruntled agent gone rogue. More than that." Delgado's tone darkened, her eyes glinting with a cold fury. "We got a letter this morning. No sender, no fingerprints. It reads." She paused, unlocking her phone and reading aloud, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Ashford isn't just a town. It's where the government buried its sins. The truth is waking up." Ben exhaled slowly, the implications of her words sinking in like a stone. "Rieck." Delgado nodded grimly. "Grant believes he's trying to sell the formula to foreign buyers, but I think he wants revenge first, a public reckoning." Ben looked toward the window, where the faint reflection of Leia's hospital room shimmered in the glass, a fragile beacon in the gathering darkness. "And we've got an 8-year-old kid caught right in the middle of it." As evening settled over Ashford, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and deep indigo, Noah walked down the corridor past the pediatric ward. Through the window, he saw Elise sitting beside Leia's bed, bathed in the soft glow of a bedside lamp, reading aloud from a worn children's book. Ranger lay at their feet, his head resting heavily on Elise's boot, his tail thumping lightly against the linoleum floor whenever Leia giggled. For the first time in days, Noah felt something ease within him, a faint flicker of warmth, a glimmer of hope that not everything had been completely devoured by duty or suffocated by guilt. But the fragile peace didn't last. As he turned down the hall, Maria Delgado was waiting, her face etched with concern. "We got the results," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "The toxin in your blood? It's a new strain. Someone modified X9 recently, and there's only one man who could have done that." Noah didn't need to ask who. The answer was a heavy weight in the air between them. His jaw set, his eyes turning toward the window where the snow fell again, soft and relentless, blanketing the town in a shroud of white. "Then it's just begun," he said, his voice a low, guttural growl. The night fell over Ashford like a shroud of cold smoke, chilling the bones and stealing the breath. The wind scraped through the hollow streets, whistling a mournful tune as it carried with it the metallic tang of blood, the acrid scent of rain, and the lingering ghost of chemical fumes. Beyond the edge of town, half hidden by the skeletal remains of an abandoned industrial park, stood the old Havsham warehouse, a monument to forgotten sins, condemned 20 years ago, yet still alive with whispers of things buried, of lives lost, and of experiments gone horribly wrong. Elise Monroe stood beside the rusted chain-link fence, her breath forming pale clouds in the frigid air. She wore her dark hair tied back beneath a wool cap, pulled low over her forehead, a flashlight clutched tightly in one hand, and her service pistol holstered beneath a thick, insulated jacket. The harsh shadows accentuated the sharp lines of her face, highlighting the unwavering determination etched there. A soldier's alertness wrapped around the faint exhaustion of someone who had seen too much, endured too much, and slept too little. Beside her, Agent Noah Grant adjusted his gloves, his movements precise, economical, restrained. The fading cut on his jaw from the previous week's fall was healing slowly, the faint scab tracing a jagged line down to his chin. A grim reminder that survival always leaves its mark, both visible and unseen. Technically, Elise said, glancing at him with a wry smile, we're suspended. You do realize that, right? Technically, Noah replied, pulling back the bolt on his flashlight and testing the beam. We're off duty, 2 civilians checking out an old property. Nothing illegal about a little harmless curiosity. Elise smirked, a hint of amusement dancing in her eyes. You've been hanging around Ben too long. His small-town charm is starting to rub off on you. Behind them, Sergeant Ben Hollister was quietly locking his patrol car, the metallic click echoing in the stillness. His old leather coat was pulled tight against the biting cold, its worn surface a testament to countless nights spent patrolling the lonely streets of Ashford. He looked every bit the small-town cop, weathered hands, tired eyes, and a quiet patience forged in grief and tempered by years of witnessing the darker side of humanity. But beneath the surface, there was something unyielding in his stance, the steely resolve of a man who had buried too many ghosts to back down now. Ranger stood patiently between them, the faint sheen of his black and tan coat catching the pale glow of the headlights. His breath steamed in the air as he waited for command, his senses on high alert, picking up the subtle shifts in the wind, the faint scent of danger that permeated the air. The faint scar on his left ear, a legacy of his past, gleamed like a badge of past wars, a silent testament to his unwavering loyalty and courage. Ben gave a curt nod toward the gaping maw of the warehouse. Let's move before the storm hits in full force. We don't know how much time we'll have before the whole damn town is snowed in. They slipped through a gap in the fence, boots crunching over shards of broken glass and loose gravel. Inside, the air was heavy, stagnant, and oppressive, a suffocating mixture of rust, decaying oil, and something vaguely chemical that burned faintly in the nostrils. Smells like something died here, Elise murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Something did, Noah said grimly, sweeping his flashlight over the desolate landscape. Broken crates littered the floor, their surfaces covered in dust and grime, some labeled with faded stencils. Sentinel Labs, property of U.S. Defense. At the far end of the vast chamber, a rusted metal stairway led downward into the impenetrable darkness. The air grew noticeably colder with each step they took, and the flickering lights seemed to struggle against the oppressive weight of the past, as if trying to resist being drawn into the abyss. Ranger froze halfway down the stairs, his tail stiff, his nose twitching, his body a coiled spring of barely contained energy. A low growl vibrated deep in his chest, a primal warning of impending danger. Easy, Ben whispered, his hand resting reassuringly on the dog's back. The dog took 2 careful steps forward, his senses fully engaged, and began to scratch frantically at a section of wall near the floor. Metal, not concrete, Elise observed, her flashlight beam focused on the spot. Elise knelt beside him, running her gloved hand over the seam. It's hollow. Noah crouched down and pried at the panel with a rusted crowbar he found leaning against the wall. The corroded metal gave way with a screech that echoed through the silent warehouse, revealing a narrow tunnel lined with pipes and tangled cables, leading to a heavy steel door marked with the ominous words, restricted access. Looks like we're not the first ones down here, he muttered, his voice tight with apprehension. Inside, the tunnel opened into a wide, cavernous underground chamber. The walls were lined with rows upon rows of shelves, each covered in shattered glass and rusted metal canisters. The floor glittered with a disturbing mosaic of chemical residue, a chilling testament to past experiments, both successful and catastrophic. In the center of the room stood a single metal desk, its drawers yanked open and scattered across the floor. A laptop lay precariously on the edge, covered in a thick layer of dust, but still blinking faintly, a ghostly sign of life in this desolate tomb. Next to it, a recorder, old but functional, sat silent, waiting to unleash its secrets. Elise pressed the play button, holding her breath. A voice crackled through the static, its edges frayed by time and trauma. Male, rough, low, but filled with an unwavering conviction that bordered on obsession. This is Thomas Rieck, former special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. If you're hearing this, it means they found me, or what's left of me. I didn't start as a traitor. I started as a believer, a patriot willing to do whatever it took to protect this country. But justice died the moment my orders were to destroy what we made, not to protect people, to bury the truth. The voice trembled, then hardened, a chilling metamorphosis from idealism to bitter resentment. They let civilians die. They said it was a controlled exposure, an acceptable loss. I watched my wife cough herself to death because they refused to acknowledge their mistake, because they were more concerned with protecting their own reputations than admitting their failures. So I'll return the favor, not to kill indiscriminately, but to remind them what fear tastes like, to force them to confront the consequences of their actions. The recorder clicked off, plunging the room into an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant howl of the wind outside. Elise swallowed hard, her voice low and filled with a mixture of horror and pity. He's not just a criminal. He's a broken believer, a man driven to the edge by grief and betrayal. Noah's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. That makes him even more dangerous. Men like that think God gave them permission to rewrite the rules, to become judge, jury, and executioner. Ben nodded grimly, his face etched with concern. Men like that think they're acting in the name of justice, but they only end up creating more suffering, more pain, more darkness. As they moved deeper into the chamber, treading carefully through the debris, Elise brushed aside a hanging tarp and froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. Behind it were dozens of glass cylinders, each filled with a viscous dark residue. Remnants of X9, the weapon that had haunted their nightmares and threatened to consume everything they held dear. Most of the cylinders were shattered, their contents spilled across the floor, but a few remained sealed, their labels peeling and faded but still legible. Noah, she said, her voice barely a whisper. This isn't just leftovers. He's been refining it, perfecting it. He's been working on this for months. Before Noah could respond, Ranger began barking sharply. His ears flattened against his head, his hackles raised, a clear sign of imminent danger. A faint hissing filled the air, barely audible above the wind. Then, a sharp click, followed by a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the warehouse. The world erupted in flame, a searing inferno that blazed with blinding intensity. A blast of heat threw Elise backward, her shoulder slamming hard into a steel support beam. The ceiling groaned ominously as debris rained down around them, a deadly shower of twisted metal and shattered concrete. Noah lunged toward her, coughing through the acrid smoke, his eyes stinging from the heat. But Ranger was faster, a blur of fur and fury, his teeth gripping Elise's jacket, dragging her across the floor toward the relative safety of the tunnel. Go, go, get out of here, Ben shouted, grabbing Noah's arm and pulling him toward the exit, urging him forward with desperate urgency. The fire swallowed the chamber behind them, the light flickering like the malevolent breath of a beast waking from its grave, consuming everything in its path. They stumbled out into the driving snow just as the warehouse shuddered violently, a plume of black smoke rising into the night sky, a dark stain against the swirling white. Sirens wailed in the distance, their mournful cries echoing across the desolate landscape. Elise coughed violently, clutching her injured shoulder, while Noah pressed a hand against her back to steady her, his face grim with concern. Ranger stood nearby, his chest heaving, his fur singed along one side, but his eyes still bright, loyal, unflinching. Ben knelt beside him, running a trembling hand along his neck, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled her out, he said, his voice cracking. He knew exactly what to do. He saved her life. Noah met Elise's eyes, a realization dawning slowly. That's not just instinct, he murmured, his voice barely audible above the howling wind. That's training. Highly specialized, highly disciplined training. An hour later, the weary group regrouped in Dr. Emily Hart's small veterinary clinic at the edge of town. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the room as Emily meticulously cleaned the scorch marks on Ranger's side. Emily was in her early 30s, petite with auburn hair tied in a loose braid and glasses that slipped down her nose whenever she concentrated, a habit she seemed oblivious to. Despite the fatigue that lined her features, her movements were precise, her hands steady, her touch gentle, a quiet calm that came from years of working with creatures who couldn't explain their pain, who relied solely on her compassion and skill. He's lucky, she said, dabbing antiseptic onto Ranger's flank with a cotton swab. Another minute in there, and he would have gone into shock. Elise, sitting on the edge of the examination table, cradled her bandaged arm, her face pale and drawn. He saved my life. I owe him everything. Emily nodded absently, her attention focused on the dog, then frowned as her fingers brushed against the tattooed number on Ranger's ear. This mark. She leaned closer, adjusting her glasses, her brow furrowed in concentration. It's not just an ID, it's a handler code. Noah turned sharply, his senses on high alert. Handler code? What does that mean? Emily hesitated, her expression troubled. Yeah, these were used by highly specialized K9 units back when the Sentinel project was active. Each dog was matched to a specific handler, a bond forged through countless hours of training and shared experiences. See this pattern? It identifies who trained him. Ben's stomach dropped, a cold dread washing over him. You mean? Emily met his eyes, her gaze filled with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Thomas Riek. I remember him. He came here months ago, asking about an old service dog he wanted to reclaim. He said it had something that belonged to him, something that was rightfully his. The room went silent, the air thick with unspoken fears. Elise stared at Ranger, realization dawning slowly, her face paling. He meant Ranger, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Emily nodded, her expression grim. I didn't connect it until now. He described the scar on the ear, the way he responds to commands in German. He said the dog was the only one who ever truly understood him, the only one he could truly trust. Noah exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, his temples throbbing. So Riek trained him. That means that he might still try to use him to manipulate him. Ben finished grimly, his voice heavy with apprehension. As a weapon, a pawn in his twisted game. As if sensing the tension in the room, Ranger lifted his head, his eyes flicking from face to face, his body tense and alert. For a fleeting moment, his body stiffened, his gaze unfocused, as though a distant memory stirred within him, an old command echoing through the corridors of his mind. Then, as Leia's soft voice called from the next room, his tail thumped once against the floor, breaking the trance, grounding him in the present. Ben watched him carefully, his expression thoughtful. He's torn, he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, caught between the man who made him and the girl who saved him, between his past programming and his present loyalty. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the horizon, a distant rumble that portended a coming storm. The wind howled across the outskirts of Ashford like an animal in pain, its mournful cries echoing through the darkness. Snow fell sideways, driven by the relentless wind, carving white scars through the night as the storm gathered its strength, poised to unleash its full fury. Somewhere deep within that frozen wasteland, an abandoned slaughterhouse loomed, its roof half collapsed, its sign dangling precariously in the wind like a broken limb, a testament to the decay and desolation that had taken root in this forgotten corner of the world. Inside, a single flickering bulb cast a sickly yellow light over the scene, illuminating a tableau of desperation and despair. Thomas Reix stood over a cluttered workbench, his hands trembling as he poured a clear, viscous liquid into a small glass vial. His once orderly hair was now disheveled, streaked with gray. His face lined with exhaustion and feverish purpose, a roadmap of sleepless nights and relentless obsession. The old leather jacket he wore clung to him like armor, scarred and cracked, much like the man himself, a reflection of the battles he had fought and the wounds he had sustained. Across from him sat Dr. Emily Hart, her wrists bound tightly to a metal chair, her posture defiant despite her captivity. The sharp edges of fear and defiance flickered in her green eyes, a testament to her unwavering courage. A jagged cut ran along her temple, the blood mingling with the melting snow that had clung to her hair, a chilling reminder of the violence she had endured. She looked small and vulnerable against the backdrop of the industrial chaos, but her spine remained straight, her spirit unbroken. Reich adjusted the vial carefully, his movements precise despite his trembling hands, his voice low, almost tender. Do you know why I brought you here, doctor? Do you understand the gravity of what I'm trying to accomplish? Emily's lips were pale and chapped, but her tone was steady, unwavering. You want me to help you rebuild X9, to recreate the weapon that destroyed so many lives. But you don't care about informed consent, you don't care about the truth. You just want revenge, a way to lash out at the people who wronged you. He smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it, only a deep-seated sadness. Revenge is the language of those who've lost everything, the only way to make the world understand the depth of their pain. I want the world to see what they did, what your FBI friends buried, the truth they desperately tried to suppress. They buried it because it killed people, because it was a monstrosity that should never have been unleashed. Emily snapped, her voice filled with righteous anger. Your wife wasn't collateral damage, Thomas. She was their victim, too. But this isn't justice, Thomas. It's suicide. It's a path that will only lead to more suffering, more death, more destruction. Reich's eyes darkened, the veins standing out along his neck like twisted cords. Don't talk to me about justice, he hissed, his voice rising in anger. I begged them to shut it down, to abandon the project before it destroyed us all. I begged, and they called me unstable, questioned my loyalty, undermined my authority. He slammed a fist onto the table, the glassware rattling precariously. I watched my wife suffocate, her lungs burning from the inside out, while they forged new contracts, while they profited from our tragedy. You think I want to kill? No, doctor. I want to remind them what they created, to force them to confront the consequences of their hubris, to make them understand the true cost of their ambition. Emily swallowed hard, her gaze flicking to a steel canister behind him, marked with a faded biohazard symbol. The label read, in stark black letters, X9 prototype strain. Her voice softened, almost pitying. And how many more have to die for that reminder, Thomas? How many more lives will you sacrifice to fuel your revenge? He didn't answer, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid, his focus narrowing to the vial in his hands, his entire being consumed by his obsession. Help me finish this, Emily, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Or I'll find someone else who will. Someone who doesn't care about the consequences. Someone who's willing to do whatever it takes to achieve my goals. The sound of crunching snow came from outside, soft, cautious, almost too quiet to notice amidst the howling wind. A small shadow darted between rusted barrels, its breath visible in quick, shallow puffs, a fragile presence in this desolate landscape. Leia Quinn, bundled in a worn gray coat that was far too big for her, pressed herself against the wall, her eyes wide with fear and determination. She had followed Ranger's faint tracks through the blinding storm, her heart pounding in her chest the whole way. She didn't know why, only that Emily hadn't shown up at the clinic as promised, and Ranger's behavior earlier that night had been strange, restless, as if he sensed something was terribly wrong. Now, peeking through a broken window, she saw the man from the police photos, the one with the jagged scar on his neck, pacing inside with a gun at his hip, his movements agitated, his face contorted in anger. And there was Emily, tied to a chair, her face pale and bruised under the flickering light, her eyes filled with a desperate plea for help. Leia's stomach twisted into a tight knot. She had to do something, anything, to save her. She fumbled for the small cell phone Ben had given her, her fingers shaking uncontrollably as she hit the speed dial. Sergeant Hollister, came the voice on the other end, barely audible through the static. Ben, it's Leia, she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. He's here, the man with the scar. He has Emily. He's in the old slaughterhouse near Route 7. Please, you have to help us. Ben's voice turned sharp, his tone filled with alarm. Stay where you are, Leia. Do not move. We're coming. Just hold on. But Leia's eyes had already drifted back toward the window, her gaze fixed on the scene inside, to the way Reich's hand gripped his gun, his knuckles white with tension, to the look of pain and desperation on Emily's face. Her fear melted away, replaced by something fiercer, something more powerful. She couldn't just wait, cowering in the shadows. She had to act, to take a stand, to fight for the people she cared about. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve, and slipped silently through the side door, disappearing into the darkness. Across town, the storm had intensified, becoming a white wall of swirling snow that blotted out the stars and obscured the horizon. Elise Monroe leaned over the computer monitor in the operations van, her face illuminated by the cold light of the screen. Strands of damp hair clung to her face, plastered against her forehead. Got her signal, she said, her voice tight with concern. It's faint, but it's there. She's moving, heading into the building. Noah cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the dashboard. Damn it, that kid. She's got a death wish. Ben pulled on his gloves, his jaw clenched, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and apprehension. Then we don't have time to wait for backup. We have to go in now before it's too late. Ranger, sitting patiently by the door, whined softly, his tail low, his muscles tense. His ears perked up, as if he could already hear the faint echo of danger beyond the howling wind, as if he sensed the presence of his old master and the looming threat that hung heavy in the air. Noah grabbed his weapon and glanced at Elise, his eyes searching hers. You good to go? You sure you're up for this? She met his gaze, her expression resolute, the faint bruises on her arm still visible beneath the bandages. "I'm good enough," she said, her voice unwavering. "Let's move. We don't have a second to waste." Ben pushed open the van doors, and the storm swallowed them whole, engulfing them in a blinding swirl of snow and ice. Inside the slaughterhouse, Leia crept closer, her movements slow and deliberate, her senses on high alert. She crouched behind a stack of crates, watching as Riek shouted into a radio, his voice laced with desperation, his words lost in the static. No one answered. His anger filled the room like a tangible presence, crackling in the air like static electricity. Emily caught sight of the girl first. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic flashing through them. She shook her head frantically, silently urging Leia to leave, to save herself. "Go!" she mouthed, her lips barely moving. But before Leia could retreat, her boot scraped against a piece of metal, the noise cutting through the tension like a knife. Riek turned, his eyes narrowed, his face hardening. "Well," he said quietly, his voice laced with a chilling calm. "Seems the world keeps sending me children, a new generation to pay for the sins of their fathers." Leia froze, her heart pounding in her chest, her body paralyzed with fear. He was taller than she expected, his shoulders broad, but slouched from exhaustion, his movements slow and deliberate. Up close, his face was a map of contradictions, a canvas of both rage and sorrow, fury etched alongside grief. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low and menacing. "Why did you follow me? Don't you know you're putting yourself in danger?" I just wanted to help her," Leia stammered, her voice trembling. "Please don't hurt her. She doesn't deserve this." Riek's voice softened, almost gentle. His eyes filled with a fleeting moment of sadness. "I'm not the monster they say I am, child. I'm not driven by malice, but by a desperate need to right the wrongs that have been committed. I'm just finishing what they started, exposing the truth that they tried so hard to bury." Then, with a flicker of sorrow in his eyes, he added, "But you shouldn't have come here. You've stumbled into something you don't understand, something that will change you forever." He raised his gun, his hand shaking, his finger tightening on the trigger. A sound erupted, shattering the silence. Not from the weapon, but from the door, the metallic crash of it bursting open, followed by the deep, guttural bark of a dog. "Ranger!" Leia cried, her voice filled with both fear and a glimmer of hope. The German shepherd bounded into the room, a blur of fur and fury, his teeth bared, his eyes blazing with protective rage. Behind him came Noah, Elise, and Ben, weapons drawn, their faces grim, their eyes filled with determination. "Drop it, Riek!" Noah shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "It's over. Let her go." Riek spun around, his gun trembling in his hand, his eyes wild with desperation. "You don't understand, Grant. I tried to save lives. I tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. They made me the villain, the scapegoat for their own failures." Elise stepped forward, her voice steady despite the howling wind screaming through the broken windows, the storm raging outside mirroring the chaos within. "You don't save lives by taking them, Thomas. You save them by stopping this madness, by surrendering to the law, by facing the consequences of your actions." Riek's face twisted into a grotesque mask of pain and rage. "Madness? You call truth madness? I was one of you. I dedicated my life to this country. I gave my soul for the FBI, and they burned me alive, left me to rot. They sacrificed my wife and they expect me to just forgive and forget?" Noah's gaze hardened, his voice filled with a cold resolve. "Then stop before you burn everyone else. Don't let your grief consume you, Thomas. There's still a chance for redemption, a chance to make amends." For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for the wind, a deafening roar that threatened to drown out all other sounds. Then Riek's voice cracked like thunder, his words filled with a lifetime of pain and betrayal. "You don't get to lecture me, Agent Grant. You didn't watch your wife die choking on government lies. You don't know what it's like to have everything taken away from you. And you think I care about your rules? You think I care about your laws? They mean nothing to me." His finger tightened on the trigger, his eyes fixed on Noah, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The gunshot split the air, a deafening explosion that reverberated through the room. Elise staggered, the bullet grazing her arm, sending a searing pain through her body. Before Riek could fire again, Ranger lunged, a blur of fur and fury, his body a weapon, his loyalty unwavering. He slammed into Riek, his powerful jaws locking around his wrist, his grip unrelenting. The gun clattered away, skidding across the floor. Riek screamed, struggling frantically, but the dog's strength was overwhelming. In the ensuing chaos, one of the canisters tipped from the table, shattering on the floor. A hiss filled the room as a cloud of white gas began to spread, swirling and expanding like a deadly fog. "X9, Emily shouted, her voice filled with panic. "It's airborne. We have to get out of here." Noah grabbed a wrench from the floor and leapt for the ventilation pipe, his movements swift and decisive. With a single swing, he smashed it shut, sealing the vent before the gas could escape into the storm, before it could spread to the rest of the town. Elise crawled towards Emily, pulling her loose from the chair, her movements hampered by her injured arm. Riek lay bleeding on the ground, clutching his wrist, his face contorted in pain. His eyes fluttered open, wild but lucid, his gaze fixed on Noah. "You think you're heroes?" he rasped, his voice barely audible. "You think you've stopped me? I just wanted them to listen, to understand the truth." Ranger collapsed beside him, panting heavily, his chest heaving, the edges of his fur beginning to darken where the toxin had touched, the deadly gas seeping into his system. Emily's voice broke, her eyes filling with tears. No, stay with me. Please don't leave me." She scrambled to her medical bag, pulling out a small syringe of antidote, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she filled it. Then, with a desperate prayer, she plunged the needle into Ranger's neck. The dog whimpered once, his eyes half-lidded, his body trembling. Emily smiled faintly through her tears, her voice choked with emotion. "Good boy," she whispered. "You did good, Ranger. You saved us all." Her body sagged moments later, her breathing becoming shallow and labored, her eyes wide with shock as the brief exposure to the gas stole her breath. Elise caught her as she slumped, her body limp and lifeless, a victim of Riek's twisted obsession. Outside, sirens wailed through the snow, their mournful cries growing louder and louder as the first responders raced towards the scene. When the officers finally stormed into the slaughterhouse, they found Riek barely conscious, blood pooling beneath him, his voice a mere whisper. I just wanted them to hear me, to understand me, one last time. He mumbled, his eyes glazed over, his spirit broken. Then his head rolled back, his eyes closing as the storm began to break outside, the first rays of dawn piercing through the clouds. The wind that once carried the scent of ash and poison now moved softly through the streets of Portland, Oregon, carrying with it the promise of spring, of new beginnings. Winter was finally loosening its grip, and the snow that had buried so many secrets had begun to melt, revealing the green beneath the white, the resilience of life amidst the desolation. Inside the marble halls of the Portland Federal Court, the air was hushed but electric, charged with the weight of the proceedings. Reporters lined the back rows, their pens poised, ready to capture every word, every gesture. Agents from multiple federal departments stood with folded arms, their faces tight with the gravity of what was about to be said, their presence a silent testament to the importance of the case. At the center of it all sat Thomas Riek, thinner than before, the sharpness of his features dulled by weeks of confinement, his spirit crushed by the weight of his crimes. His once commanding posture had wilted under the weight of the gray jumpsuit of a federal prisoner, a symbol of his fall from grace. Yet his eyes still carried that familiar flicker, a haunting mixture of defiance, grief, and a lingering hint of fanaticism. Judge Catherine Holbrook, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes like cold glass, adjusted her glasses and looked over the courtroom, her gaze unwavering, her presence commanding. Her voice was calm but absolute, a voice that brooked no argument, no dissent. Thomas Riek, she began, her words echoing through the silent courtroom. This court finds you guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit biological terrorism, attempted murder of federal officers, and unlawful detainment of a civilian. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The gavel came down with a single, resounding crack, a final punctuation mark on a long and tragic chapter. Riek didn't flinch, his expression unchanged. His lips twitched into something like a smile, sad, distant, almost melancholic. You buried the truth once, he said. Clad in a blue coat and boots comically oversized, she stood a little straighter than before. Ranger, ever vigilant, sat beside her, his fur catching the morning sun, gleaming like polished gold. The faint scar, a memento of that desperate night, was barely visible now, a pale line beneath his thick fur, a permanent reminder of the courage he displayed when everything was on the line. Emily knelt beside Laya, her voice soft with encouragement. Ready? Laya nodded, a flicker of nervousness in her eyes. Do I really have to read this in front of everyone? You don't have to, sweetie, Emily reassured her, her hand gently squeezing Laya's. But if you want to, you can. You've earned your voice. You've earned the right to be heard. Laya hesitated, her gaze sweeping over the expectant faces. Then, with a deep breath, she unfolded the paper. It trembled slightly in her small hands, but when she spoke, her voice, though a little shaky at first, soon gained strength and clarity. My name is Laya Quinn, she began, her words cutting through the hushed anticipation. A year ago, I didn't have a home. I didn't have anyone. I was lost and alone. But one night, I found a hurt dog, shivering and scared, and somehow he found me. We helped each other heal. We found people who didn't give up on us, even when we'd given up on ourselves. Officer Ben, Agent Elise, and Dr. Hart. They saw something in us worth saving. Her eyes flicked up to Emily, who offered a tearful smile of encouragement. And now, Laya continued, her voice thick with emotion, now I have a family, a real family who loves me. A soft wave of applause rippled through the gathered crowd, agents, doctors, and the townsfolk of Ashford, all touched by the young girl's story. Even Ben Hollister, standing a little apart in his impeccably pressed uniform, discreetly wiped at the corner of his eye. He had seen so much darkness, but Laya was a beacon, a testament to the enduring power of hope. When the ceremony concluded, Elise stepped back to the podium, her expression serious. This case, she stated, her voice resonating with conviction, isn't just about punishment, about locking away those who did wrong. It's about responsibility. It's about acknowledging the truth, however deeply it was buried. The Sentinel Project is officially being reopened under federal investigation. Several officials have already been dismissed, and more will follow. Justice doesn't end with a verdict. It begins with accountability. It begins with ensuring this never happens again. Her words, carried on the gentle breeze, echoed across the courtyard, a promise of change and a warning to those who abused their power. Later that afternoon, in the tranquil garden behind St. Mary's Medical Center, a more intimate ceremony took place. A line of officers and agents stood at attention as the FBI director, a tall, commanding woman with cropped blonde hair named Valerie Sloan, stepped forward, holding a small velvet case. Today, she began, her voice firm yet laced with emotion. We honor a life, a spirit that reminded us all what loyalty truly means, what unwavering devotion looks like. She knelt beside Ranger, carefully opening the case to reveal a silver medallion, crafted in the shape of a shield. The engraving read, K9 of Honor, for courage beyond duty. Ranger, as if understanding the significance of the moment, tilted his head inquisitively as the medal was placed around his neck. A wave of laughter and heartfelt applause erupted. Elise leaned towards Noah, a playful smile on her face. I think he's handled the spotlight with more grace than most of our agents. Noah chuckled, his eyes filled with pride. He's earned it, every bit of it. That evening, as twilight painted the sky over Ashford in hues of lavender and rose, Ben Hollister parked his patrol car near the park's frozen pond. The air, crisp and clean, carried the scent of pine and the promise of thawing earth. From the passenger seat, Laya leaned forward, resting her chin on her knees, gazing out at the tranquil scene. It's pretty, she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet wonder. Ben smiled, his gaze mirroring hers. Yeah, it's been a long time since this place felt so peaceful. Leia turned to him suddenly, her eyes searching his. Uncle Ben. He froze for a fraction of a second. The unexpected title hanging in the air, as fragile and precious as the first breath of spring. Yes, kiddo, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. Thank you for not giving up on me. His throat tightened, making it difficult to speak. You don't have to thank me, Leia. You gave me something back too. Something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Ben looked out at the fading sun, its golden rays casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. Hope, he whispered, the word carrying the weight of his past and the lightness of his future. Days later, when the snow had finally melted, giving way to streams that carved through the fields, a small gathering met again, not for verdicts or medals, but for remembrance. They stood before the vast white expanse of the Ashford Plains, the place where the long winter had begun, and where so much pain had finally ended. A simple wooden cross marked the memorial. For the victims of the Sentinel Project, the inscription read, for those whose voices were silenced by lies. A wreath of wildflowers lay at its base, a splash of color against the muted landscape. Elise, standing beside Leia, looked down at her, her voice gentle. You okay, Leia? Leia's eyes followed a flock of birds as they soared into the pale sky, their wings catching the sunlight. If someone did bad things because they were hurt, can they still be forgiven? She asked, her voice barely audible. Elise took a long, thoughtful breath. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Leia. It's about understanding and about what comes after. If someone chooses to protect instead of destroy, if they choose to make amends and build a better future, then yes, they can be forgiven. Just like you chose to protect that night. Just like you chose to be brave. Leia smiled faintly, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Then maybe Reddit can find peace too. Maybe, Elise said quietly, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. We all have to choose what kind of story we leave behind. We all have the power to write a new ending. Leia nodded slowly, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small kite, shaped like a golden eagle, its wings painted with streaks of crimson and white. She carefully handed one end of the string to Elise. Will you help me? Always, Elise replied, her voice filled with unwavering love and support. Together, they ran across the thawing field, Ranger bounding joyfully beside them, barking with unrestrained enthusiasm. The kite caught the wind and soared higher and higher, its vibrant colors glinting in the golden light. When it reached the open sky, Elise stopped, her eyes fixed on the soaring eagle. The sun was rising behind the clouds, its rays spilling over the land, not blinding, but gentle, like forgiveness itself. For the first time in a long while, Ashford was silent, not with grief, but with peace. A deep, abiding peace that settled over the land like a gentle blessing. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or blinding light. They come quietly, through a child who chooses courage over fear, a loyal dog who refuses to give up, or a broken soul who learns to protect instead of destroy. What happened in Ashford reminds us that even in the darkest winters of life, the grace of the Lord can reach us through the kindness of ordinary hearts. Every act of mercy, every moment of compassion, is a whisper from heaven, a reminder that love is still the greatest force on earth. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment to tell us how faith and kindness have shaped your life. And subscribe to our channel to join a community that believes in second chances, redemption, and the quiet miracles God sends every day. May the Lord bless you and your family, keeping you safe, steadfast, and surrounded by his light today and always.